With this device, Josiah Shem accidentally shattered spacetime. I used it as the basis for my technology to access liminal spaces so we could feed the artifact.
Now, it's happening again.
In the beginning, and believe me, there was a beginning, everything was in its proper place. Time was linear, just as it should be. But nonetheless, here we are. Bloody teleporters.
Space and time are once again falling to pieces in Black Ops 6 Zombies, potentially setting up for a universe-hopping, time-jumping adventure similar to Black Ops 3 Zombies. Arguably the pinnacle of Call of Duty Zombies. We may be on the precipice of map design changing drastically, with much more fantastical settings soon to return in Black Ops 7 Zombies. All of that will be explored in this video, so stay tuned until the very end. This video was inspired by a really cool Twitter thread by fellow Zombies creator Stanley557, inspired by my recent John D. Impossible Easter egg videos. I'll be showing some of the tweets from that thread on screen throughout the video, and also a link below if you want to read it after you're done with this video. While initially I looked in other places for the story discussions we've had on Shattered Veil so far, this thread helped show me just how major a couple of lines of dialogue may be for the future of the story, and was kind of a similar idea that I was thinking of anyways. And in fact, I've seen many people in my comments since Shattered Veil release bringing up my prior John D videos and how they feel like it's paralleling it so much so, which is so interesting to me because I literally just released those videos before Shattered Veil released. I even had some people in my comments accusing me of knowing that it was about to happen, which is just wild because it really was just a massive coincidence that I was talking about space-time initially fracturing in the original universe in the Aether story, and then Treyarch went ahead and did it again just a couple weeks later in the Dark Aether story. It really does all work out perfectly. Once I started to think about it, I couldn't stop, and so I knew I had to make this video. And thank you, Stanley, for really contextualizing it all in a easy to understand way. It feels like there's very few people left in storyline discussions nowadays for Zombies, so we really should be trying to put all of that on a pedestal and rebuild it from the ashes. But let's dive into the discussion. Josiah Shem, namesake and leader of Shem's Folly cult, built and lived at the mansion during the 1800s. The first time we heard of this was back during Liberty Falls.
Chief of Security, John Blanchard. Inspected construction today. Project's really coming together, but I keep thinking about how my granddad wouldn't take me to Fort Washita when I was a kid. I wanted to do their bullshit ghost tour for Halloween. Sounded like dumb fun. Sorry, Johnny. That place is bad medicine. Granddad actually used those words, and he meant it. Now I'm starting to think the same thing might be true about the mansion. I'd like to believe Josiah Shem didn't know what he was doing when he had his flock build the place. If he did, then he got what he deserved. Shem's folly. Ain't that the truth? Every owner after him, captains of industry, gangsters, you name it. All their money and power couldn't save them. Shit like that doesn't just happen without other forces at work. Granddad knew that. But that's where the director wants to bunk down. And I can't talk him out of it. So my job's making sure he doesn't end up like everyone else who moved into the murder mansion. Lucky me.
This was our first look into Shem and his cult. Then, in the ending of the tomb, we get yet another blurb. This short box of text appears briefly next to the central artifact during the cutscene. Shem File 49, Liberty Falls Mansion. Hark, my flock, your shepherd has heard the great voice from beyond. The voice that drew shamans and medicine men here for centuries before our arrival. The voice that designated us as its chosen, bade us seize the Serpent Mound and build our dwelling upon it. Here, in our mansion of eternal life, shall the horn's key open the way, breaking the bonds of mortality that we may dwell forever in our promised realm. Ready yourselves, for the day approaches for our final meal, and farewell to the flesh. Recently I did a video on the full story and life of Josiah Shem, which you can check out in the description, as well as how I believe it may be tying into the Chaos story. However, in case you've already seen it and just need a refresher, or don't want to watch it, I'm going to recap his brief story here. But if you feel like you're missing context at any point, definitely check out that video as well. Josiah Shem was a charismatic mystic who, in 1770, led a group of followers to forcibly seize a sacred Native American serpent mound in the area that would become Liberty Falls. The natives revered this site for worshipping their gods, using a sacred artifact called the Horned Key to communicate with their god of death, likely Cortifex. Shem took this antler-carved relic to speak with the Deathless One, establishing his cult's connection to the Dark Aether. Over the next 40 years, Shem and his growing flock constructed a massive mansion on the site, conducting rituals that disturbed the local townsfolk. He promised his followers that the Deathless One would grant them eternal life in the new paradise he would bring about upon the earth. By 1810, Shem's cult, numbering hundreds according to Tammy Lundberg's studies, prepared for a final ritual at the Serpent Mound under the Taurus constellation. As we hear in another intel, the ritual went awry, and Shem and his flock were betrayed, resulting in their deaths.
Attend me, brethren. With this sacrifice, we conclude the second rite. The glorious hour of our ascension draws nigh. We, who have toiled sore long these 40 wretched years. We, who have endured the bile, scorn, and pity of Liberty Falls and its shape. We, who in this year of the Lord 1810, here in this most holy and sanctified of places, shall reap the just rewards of our labors and be remade by Him. Behold, brothers and sisters, Aldebaran rises. Blessed Taurus turns its mighty eye to witness our supplications. Rejoice, for we shall be the eternal guardians of a new garden that shall flourish, yea, unto all the ends of the earth. Great voice from beyond, hear your servants. May our prayers transcend the gulf between worlds. Hear us, Deathless One. We stand ready. Fulfill thine dark, unholy covenant. Beuta she no moreta. Beuta she no more lu. Beuta she
remains of Shem's followers found in the Serpent Mound chamber were unnaturally preserved in stone, yet fragile, suggesting the moment of failure may literally have frozen in time. And when you approach these statues, they literally just tremble into dust. This potentially connects it to the shattering of space-time. As confirmed by Richtofen in Shattered Veil's cutscene, the Shem Device shattered space-time around the mansion, creating liminal spaces between the human world and the dark ether. There's no 100% confirmation this moment is exactly the moment we hear Shem be betrayed by the entity they are worshipping, but they definitely seem to be connected. Either way, because of this shattering, the Shem Device's impact extended far beyond its time, becoming the foundation for Project Janus's technology to access the liminal spaces. This breaking of space-time seems to have large potential to become a pivotal moment in the history of this new Dark Ether story and narrative, and how its presentation may shift going forward. With COD 2025 Zombies, let's look back at the Aether story as an example. When it began, we had relatively believable locations, with a bit of fantastical technology here and there, but for the most part they were very grounded initially: research facilities, secret labs, insane asylums, etc. Then it got a bit more chaotic after the wild ending of Moon in Black Ops 1, where we literally did a soul swap with a little girl inside an alien pyramid device over a battle over control of the Aether between Richtofen and Samantha, culminating in the explosion of Earth. And then things got crazy with Black Ops 2. We saw an Alcatraz Hell dimension, then an alternative universe in Dimension 63 Origins with giant robots roaming the land. Settings began to start to get really wild, going far and beyond the initial grounded concept of zombies. Some didn't like this, but many argued it elevated the settings for zombies maps to remain interesting, as zombies couldn't remain the same thing forever. It had to evolve, it had to change. Obviously, some fans will get left behind in the process, but new fans would muster as well, which did end up happening with the success of Black Ops 3. Speaking of, let's jump into that section. It's here the multiverse steps in. We get to see more and more wild locations across the DLC season of Black Ops 3, with fantastical histories to really differentiate the way things are in each map. While early Zombies maps mirrored the stuff we see now, mostly having to stick to real-world history and make locations make sense, the multiverse created in Black Ops 3 allowed us to get a universe where World War II never stopped and giant robots were fighting dragons in Stalingrad, just as one example. And what was the key to this multiverse's creation? At least inside the story, as obviously from an outside the story perspective, they simply needed to create more wild locations to evolve the mode and keep it fresh and entertaining. As explored in my John D videos, we hear Dr. Monty say the reason himself. The spark that created the multiverse was the shattering of space-time by the initial teleporter experimentations at Der Riese.
Monty told us the truth. Our journey is the very reason this madness exists. We are the ones who fractured the universe.
The very first one was Richtofen teleporting the Walnut for the first time. And we then learned in Black Ops 4 that the elemental shard, the souls of the original characters, was foundational in creating the multiverse as well. As when Ultimus Richtofen was experimenting on his test subjects that went on to be Ultimus, he literally bonded their souls to the fabric of the Aether itself, meaning they were very much the multiverse's DNA. The multiverse and they cannot exist without one another, in a paradoxical sense. In essence, I think that this may be an exact parallel to where we are now in the Dark Ether story. History is repeating, with the new shattering of space-time being set up, and these liminal spaces serving as small pockets of removed space-time. We could be seeing the setup for how new maps could work in the same way the old shattering of space-time created the fractures for Black Ops 3's DLC maps. When we enter a liminal space inside of Shattered Veil, it is a room of the mansion fully preserved from the point in time it was created. When we go inside the dining hall, for instance, all of the modern technology is absent. All we see is the dining table set up the way that Shem had it that very night for his final supper. No elevator or giant technology to be seen. Let's scale up the concept a bit. What if this happened to an entire building, or even a city? You could have an old western town, like Buried for example, but this time inside a liminal space, so you could see it exactly as it was. We could be in the modern day technically in the timeline, but travelling to points in history to see unique places and events not normally possible with the modern day storytelling standard. With the shared Call of Duty universe, they don't want to do anything groundbreaking to the world because it would break, for example, the Modern Warfare campaign. contains. Whether you like the shared Call of Duty universe or not, it does seem to be sticking, and so the writers need to find a way to work around it, and this could be the way. They can keep the modern world playing out as normal, but inside these liminal spaces and these historical events or alternative histories, they can explore multiversal-like settings. We could be in the modern day technically on the timeline, but traveling to points in history to see unique places and events not normally possible. Plus, if we say, go inside a liminal space of an area from 200 years ago and change history somehow, like cut down a tree, that tree would still be standing once we left the liminal space. Essentially, we can see and interact with other times without changing the present or warping history at all. And in fact, considering the Sentinel artifact is such a key role in the Black Ops 6 zombie story, this is basically the same concept we saw with the Sentinel trials in Black Ops 4 zombies. For example, when we would start the trial on the Titanic, all of that stuff would essentially happen in a bubble, like a liminal space. As soon as the trial is over, the zombies revert back to humans, the Titanic crashes as normal, no one has any memory or recollection of what actually happened in that little bubble. No one knew the trial happened. They could be having a similar methodology for Black Ops 7 zombies. In a way, they can play around with history or alternative events without having to mess the overall universe up. Now, let's combine this concept with what we know about Call of Duty 2025 zombies. We know that this Warden character, who is likely the Shadowsmith, shown at the end of Modern Warfare Zombies, is in pursuit of the essence of the original characters to restore the multiverse. And considering in Shattered Veil, we enter inside of liminal spaces in order to gather the essence of Shem and others in a trial very similar to the summoning key trials we do on Shadows of Evil, perhaps we are seeing a preview of how COD 2025 could play out. Because these rituals look eerily similar to the Shadows of Evil ones, and we know now that Easter egg was essentially a giant preview for the DLC season, as each one of the original characters became a gateworm for tracking the super Easter egg up to Revelations for the RK5, although it was planned to be something much bigger that got cancelled, which I do have a video on, linked on screen and in the description. This could essentially be the same thing, showing us a preview of what's to come on a smaller scale. Maybe the Shadowsmiths are going to try and perform different rituals similar to these for each one of the original characters in a way to try and blow up their essence, essentially like the Big Bang to restore the multiverse, similar to at the end of Revelations when Sophia and the summoning key and all of the toys of the children get catapulted into the Apothecan Sun, which restarts the universe. This would make sense with the leaks that we've heard about COD 2025 Zombies maps. Now, these are just concepts, so we don't know if they're going to make it into the final release version of the game, and of course, like with all leaks and rumors, we need to take them with a grain of salt. They're subject to change and misinterpretation. Nevertheless, they're very interesting for our discussion because we've heard of one map which describes Axis powers having taken over an alternative version of New York where World War II does not end and the Nazis have taken over the city. We've also heard of a Shoan temple next to an erupting volcano. We've heard of a large map with a transit-style transport system, and even a map set on a space station have been some of the map locations leaked. These places sound very fantastical and hard to imagine existing inside of the Dark Aether story without some major corruption and effects on the world. Because we've seen time and time again, any place inside the Dark Aether ends up being corrupted. Warped versions of our real world. Except of course, within liminal spaces. What if entire locations, cities, space stations, etc. have become liminal spaces in the past, during the time the Aether multiverse still existed? This would essentially preserve these places and their unique histories from the old multiverse without making the story deal with the complexities of time travel and actual multiversal hopping. We can go into this World War II New York map and rescue Richthofen's essence without worrying about any of the consequences of the present day or the real world. And that's how the essence of the original characters could come back into play without breaking the law of Black Ops 4's ending or actually bringing the characters back from the dead, which has been a big point of contention within the community. People do not want the ending of Tag Der Toten, which many see as being an extremely poetic one, to be undone, just for nostalgia. But this is how they could do it. They could all be and exist in liminal spaces, not actually alive in the real world. And this is because in Shattered Veil, we see in these liminal spaces that these quote-unquote copies of Shem, Colton, etc. are all still conscious enough to react to what we do in the game and aren't just static recordings or glimpses into the past. they are alive in a weird way. They seem to be genuine copies of the people just trapped inside these spaces. They are memories, but they are not just an old TV film. They are not like the spectral reflections we see on D Machine, where they're essentially just 3D recordings that don't react to us. They are just glimpses into the past, very different to what the liminal spaces are. Maybe each of these liminal spaces contain a variant of the original characters. Two of them make sense off of the rip from the leaked concepts. For example, the Shoin Temple for Takeo makes perfect sense, especially because there's been other leaks that the game's going to have heavy Japanese theme. The alternative history German New York would be perfect for Richtofen. So maybe they really are trying to do a repeat of Black Ops 3, where we have character-specific maps for each one, themed about not just them, but their nationalities too. Nikolai was even a pilot, so it's possible in some future universe he was a space pilot or astronaut and ended up on this space station map, for example. Or even if the other maps aren't even for the characters, simply the concept of liminal spaces means we can get a ton of fantastical spaces and times in the dark ether, rather than just corrupted versions of these places in our own reality. Now, at the end of Tag Der Toten, we literally plunged the multiverse into the dark ether, but at the time we didn't really know about liminal spaces. Maybe the memories of all of the old multiverse exist somewhere, somehow in these liminal spaces. I mean, at the end of Tag Der Toten, all of the characters wish for their hopes and dreams if the world was to be okay. What they really wanted, could all of those exist somewhere in these memories, these pockets? Do all of these universes from the old multiverse exist in these liminal spaces? I mean, Victus literally got thrown into the dark ether. Is there a liminal space containing Victus, or in fact many, somewhere out there? They were never bonded to the ether, so when it got collapsed, their souls should surely still exist somehow. They weren't purged in the same way that Ultimus and Primus were. This also ties a lot into what Craig Houston said when Tag Der Toten was approaching. He said it is the end of the line for Ultimus and Primus, as well as Victus. But because they had a multiverse, there are endless stories that they can continue to tell. Now the multiverse is gone, but this way it can still exist somehow, and still allow them to tell alternative stories with alternative versions of these characters that would have existed in the endless multiverse we had before. There are a near infinite amount of different variations of these characters we've never even glimpsed of, and we've only been centered around Ultimus and Primus. If Trek do go this route, this allowance for traveling to different times and ability to preserve the life of characters that the outside world thinks are dead also helps to explain a lot of the questions I've had lingering about Modern Warfare Zombies' ending. Why was Ava Jansen pulled into the mansion in the mirror? Why are the Requiem characters seen dead directly in the intro cutscene, but seemingly a part of the next game, as they have leaked to also be playable in COD 2025, so we could have the original characters and Requiem either as an 8-player crew, or maybe we can just select whether we choose Requiem or we choose the original characters on the menu select screen. If that's the case, I don't know how that would affect the Easter egg, blah blah blah. Honestly, they're not even getting much lines nowadays, but I'm hoping that's going to change with COD 2025. The last leaks that came out did say that Zombies is going to be getting a much heavier story focus. Finally, it should have happened for Black Ops 6 though, but with the original characters back, it's so important that they get these characters right, so I'm hoping they stick true to their word and they all get substantial dialogue on every single map and don't just feel like cardboard cutouts of who they used to be. This could also explain why the Requiem heads look so much older in the 1996 cutscene we see in Modern Warfare Zombies, even though it's only a few years after we see them now in Black Ops 6. My guess is this could be because the crew, Requiem, are going to be inside of a liminal space for the majority of Black Ops 7, and somehow their ability to shatter space-time allowed the Shadowsmiths to pull Ava Jansen into said liminal space that it's in. Now previously I thought that a way that Trek could work around this is that they might get pulled into the dark ether stuck in a cycle. They get dragged in at the end of Black Ops 6, they end up playing in some sort of cycle in the dark ether throughout Black Ops 7, then they get pulled out of the dark ether back again in time for Grey to give birth to Ava Jansen, in time for them to then die, that we see at the beginning of Modern Warfare Zombies. But it could actually be that all of COD 2025 plays out in a liminal space, they then come back out of the dark ether at the end of the game, setting up the stage stage for Modern Warfare Zombies' story. A lot of people are saying Modern Warfare Zombies is going to get retconned completely. I do not think this to be true. I think it'll be something like how I'm describing. I think honestly we are nearing the end of Black Ops 6 Zombies already. I can't see how all of these questions get answered in one map. There's just way too much. It's going to be way too overbloated if they try and cram it all in. So the only way I can make sense of it all is maybe all of these questions are still going to be saved for Black Ops 7, which is frustrating for me. I think it's been dragged out way too long, but it could be that these are some sort of resolution at the end of Black Ops 7 instead. This allows for those characters, Requiem, to meet an adult version of Ava and inspire her own creation once they leave. Once again, a concept I explored in that prior video linked on screen about the cycle. This would let them spend potentially decades or more inside of the Dark Aether with its warped passage of time, in a liminal space or otherwise, and still only exit in 1992 or 1993, leaving time for them to create Ava and have her born in time, to still be 3 years old in 1996, like the Modern Warfare Zombies cutscene depicts. Their time in this weird liminal space alongside the original characters could even account for the oddity of some kind of 8-player mode or 8-character mode we've heard about in the early COD 2025 leaks, 4 being the Requiem characters and 4 being the original characters we meet in the liminal space. Will we finally get an 8-player crew? This transit-inspired map that's been described has been described as being one of the largest zombies maps in existence, so I wonder if it could really support an 8-player crew. Or, like I said, if they do have technical constraints, maybe they're just going to limit it to just 4 like they did with Alpha Omega, which was such a shame. It would have been great to get all 8 of Ultimus and Primus playing with each other. Oh my god, I don't know what I've just said. And Craig Hewson just explained that due to the short time crunch to write all of the lines for the map, it would have just been way too much work to write enough lines for all 8 of the characters. And Alpha Omega still has a bunch of lines. I think it has some of the most out of any of the maps. They really wanted to give fleshed out dialogue, considering it was the first time both sets of crews properly met and interacted since the classified ending. And of course, it surprisingly, in retrospect, ended up being the final map they were even playable, since we had Victor's playable on Tag Der Toten, weirdly enough, instead, so they really needed to give them a proper send-off. And they got a lot even without all 8 on the map at once, and you would only be able to select one version of the characters from either set. So maybe something similar will happen with Black Ops 7, we're going to have to wait and see. But Requiem have not gotten enough character building inside of Black Ops 6, so I guess having them in Black Ops 7 as well will allow them to continue that and hopefully flesh them out more, but I'm not confident really in much.
Our blood! Mine blood! You cannot possibly expect me to let this happen!
This massive corruption they could experience in this 10-year or more battle inside of the Dark Aether would also explain why they died to this machine, capturing their essence and sacrificed their lives that we saw in Urzikstan. Now, how they end up in Urzikstan is beyond me. Obviously, it's probably something to do with being mandated by Modern Warfare and Infinity Ward, because it has nothing to do with the current storyline. Regardless, spending this long in the Dark Aether would surely cause their blood to become incredibly corrupted with Ethereum. We know that employees of Project Janus get inoculated against the effects of the Dark Aether, but it's unlikely their prisoners get these same injections. This would mean once they potentially win in Black Ops 7 and escape the realm, they'd no doubt be the single largest sources of Ethereum on the planet, bar Samantha Maxis herself, if she's even alive by that time. Obviously, Gray explained how Samantha was exposed to the Dark Aether more than the rest of them, but she probably is either dead or still in the Dark Aether by that point.
We were all exposed to the Dark Aether. Sam, most of all.
They would essentially be walking Dark Aether corruption time bombs, especially if their trip to the Dark Aether is somehow related to the Ethereum reactors that are melting down in Janus Towers. These things exploding near the characters would give them unheard of amounts of Ethereum exposure. They'd be lucky to not mutate instantly. And maybe these towers melting down will plunge them inside of the Dark Aether, because we don't know exactly what they are for. They were probably used to charge the Sentinel artifact and give it enough power for Sam to get what she wants, reconstituting the real Samantha Maxis' body, as well as what Richtofen wants to bring his family back from the dead, and rebuild them with the infinite power building materials of Prima Materia. Maybe this could essentially make COD 2025 essentially one big Sentinel trial, where we activate the artifact at the end, are plunged into said trial, come out at the end with the world unscathed, as if nothing ever happened. This is why I think they all agree to remove their blood and sacrifice themselves. Gray says they are dying in the cutscene like it's some sort of disease, but we clearly see them all together and hooked up to that machine in the 1996 cutscene.
We are dying. but we can ensure that someone will watch over you.
This, to me, suggests that their corruption was slowly killing them and also putting the world at risk. So they decided the best method to protect the world is remove their Ethereum-related blood, creating the glowing vials we see in Modern Warfare zombies. And they were so infected that just one of the vials bursting was enough to instantly start an outbreak. I guess this is similar to how Richtofen's blood got extracted on Blood of the Dead. Because yes, they've been in the Dark Aether before, for example in the Tomb, and I guess technically the liminal spaces, but that surely wouldn't have exposed them to as much of the Dark Aether than what seems to happen to lead to their deaths. Yes, Samantha was only in the Dark Aether for a short term on Firebase C, yet it corrupted her massively, but I think that was largely in part due to her psychology, as well as the fact she had already been pre-exposed to the Dark Aether from the Aether story, literally being physically in control of the zombies at one point in time, so that's a completely different story in my opinion. And if Ava is pulled into a liminal space alongside them, then this sets up all of these different loose ends to meet inside the next game. Ava, the original characters, and the Requiem crew. This makes sense because we see the mansion inside of the mirror, but she is inside the mansion itself, now converted into a hotel. The very mirror from Richtofen's bedroom. This probably is a liminal space, explaining why it's black and white, as if it's some sort of different period of time. It would also explain why we see the mansion from a third-person perspective. We see the outside of it, yet surely we should see the inside if it's just a doorway into the other realm, mirroring it like we've seen with other Dark Aether instances. Usually when we look in a Dark Aether portal, we just see what's on the other side. For example, the portal into the Nexus on the Tomb, we just see that right there as it is. We don't see some sort of third-person perspective of it, we just see it as if it's walking through into that space. The same with the portal into the church on Liberty Falls. It's again just an extension of that reality. It's not a different perspective, it's just the space as it would regularly be, even if it wasn't a part of the Dark Aether. This would allow for all of these loose threads to collide together. Ava, the original characters, and the Requiem crew. Now, I want to go through Stanley's Twitter threads and explain how this may be paralleling the Aether story with Richtofen's shattering space-time initially, with it shattering more and more the more that Primus and the other versions of the characters would time travel. So Stanley said was thinking more about elements of Shattered Veil, including the quote that Josiah Shem accidentally shattered space-time. That object/event is probably what the Shattered Veil actually is. The ritual he did for Cortifex broke space-time. This caused the Aether worms to harvest, I guess, the Ethereum discharge at the area, and amalgams among other objects to get scattered across space-time. So basically, there's been a bit of a theory for a while now that the amalgams have teleported through time, because there's statues of them seemingly being there from ancient times in the history of the Tomb, yet people think they were created by Dr. Modi on Terminus Island, so obviously they shouldn't exist in the past. Now, I think this is somewhat of a misunderstanding of what actually happens on Terminus. I think basically the Dark Aether has a natural evolutionary process, which is why we see so many of the old constantly returning, and I think when Modi was experimenting with the Dark Aether, she basically just created a catalyst for this evolutionary process to occur, hence the amalgams coming about. Not that she actually created it, she just generated the process that has already happened many times in the past. Similar to how we see parasites still, nowadays, as a part of that process, but we know they used to be part of the Apothecan hordes way back in the day. Regardless, that is the theory though, and I'm kind of just going to negate that for this discussion here because I think it's kind of irrelevant. But like I talked about in my John D videos, when Richtofen teleported the Walnut for the first time, this I believe is when John D, a real-life occultist to Queen Elizabeth I, detected ripples through the ether. Him and his best friend Edward Kelly were communicating with angels, which I believe to either be the regular keepers / the corrupted keepers before they potentially became Apothecans, and essentially I believe either side was taken. Edward Kelly to then join the Legion of the Apothecans / the corrupted keepers before they became them, John D to ascend to Dr. Monty to lead the Keepers. The Keepers probably chose John D in response to the Apothecans choosing Edward Kelly, and them feeling like they would lose the war without D. They didn't want to take him initially, I believe, at least, but they needed to in order to win the war. I believe this was still during the Warring of Agartha before they fully split apart and the Apothecans were banished to the Dark Aether. Essentially, as Monty explained, time was linear until Richthofen and Schuster first teleported the Walnut for the first time, and it broke space-time permanently. Essentially, this meant that it was almost as if time had never been linear. Because obviously, with the cycle of the Aetherverse and time travel, it's completely in a paradoxical sense. The prior cycles had to have always happened in order for the current one to have happened, yet that's physically impossible. That's because it was linear until the universe shattered. So I believe this has happened again. Stanley says, so what if this is actually how it all happens? The Shire Shem shattered the veil between space-time, and the idea of liminal spaces could be how they intend to bring back Primus and Ultimus. And this is exactly what I've talked about in this video. I believe Primus and Ultimus won't be back alive. It won't be them resurrecting from the dead after the ending of Tag Der Toten, where they all clearly died by poison in a very bloody manner, but rather we'll be seeing these sort of memories of them sort of held in some sort of purgatory-like state in these pockets similar to the people in the history of the mansion. Stanley says it also makes you wonder why the reason for this could be and if it was intentional. With the veil between space and time broken, now maybe Cortifex had intended this as a backup plan in case he was defeated. Now I have actually seen this theory floating around. People think Cortifex might return, and honestly I would think this to be true as well. If it weren't for, I just don't really see how he can fit in, because Cortifex keeps getting referenced throughout Black Ops 6 Zombies' story. He was referenced in the history of the tomb, he was referenced in the ending of bending the gates of Duat to his will to feed its shards of Tempest, which I believe are basically just an ancient term that they use for prima materia. I think it's all basically one and the same thing, and I believe the shards of time are the liminal spaces, and Cortifex was essentially just feeding it these past memories, which are essentially prima materia, because Sam says as we feed the central artifact Unshattered Veil, the souls, the essence of these characters in the liminal spaces, that we're essentially feeding it prima materia. We're feeding it the shards of Tempest. That's all it is. It's basically different terms for the same thing. We're feeding it shards of time. These liminal spaces are these shards of time. When we were talking about it before, we were thinking of it more in a literal sense. It's a bit complicated to understand, especially when prima materia can be depicted as a literal crystal, a shard if you will. Prima materia is depicted as gas, it's depicted as these crystals. I guess it's also these memories, these liminal spaces. It's all kind of the same thing. It's a bit hibbity-jibbity, sci-fi, fantasy, babble nonsense, but regardless, I hope that makes sense to you. But the thing is, this might actually explain a big thing that I've been thinking with regards to the Dark Aether storyline. So the thing is, the Dark Aether storyline was supposed to be a reboot to keep the storyline simple. We got Dean Machine, and it was as if the universe had basically been normal since it was rebooted on Tag Der Toten. It wasn't until the cyclotron penetrated the Dark Aether, the veil once more, that the zombies started flooding back into the universe. I feel like this, narratively speaking, made a lot more sense with the ending of Tag Der Toten and the point of Nikolai purging the prior multiverse, because yes, it does still feel like it undoes Tag Der Toten a bit with the zombies returning, but at least it wasn't on as big of a scale as it used to be in the old multiverse. However, things started getting really messy with Vanguard zombies, because then they started retrofitting all of these Dark Aether gods having actually been communicating with humanity for eons, basically, since the old multiverse got plunged into the Dark Aether, and that kind of worked. It didn't go too far, but then we got to Modern Warfare zombies, and the zombie outbreaks are still occurring all of these years later, when it was a very nice contained story within Cold War. The cyclotron begins pouring out all of these zombies once again. We end up closing all of the outbreaks by the end of the story. That's that. But now come Black Ops 6 zombies, they've completely messed up the point of the Dark Aether story, which again, like I said, was supposed to keep things simple because people found it too hard to keep up with the Aether story. Now personally, the Aether story was when the story was at its best, but I like the direction things were going in Cold War zombies. I feel like they needed to really strip back things in a way to get new people on board. And I still felt like Cold War zombies had a lot of mystery and a lot of unanswered questions, but the problem is most of them have just been ignored come Black Ops 6. All the questions are just underwhelming, the little that we have gotten answered, and that's been a major problem. But regardless, I'm going off on a tangent there. The problem is that now, with, for example, Citadel Day More, there are hundreds, thousands of years of history of zombie outbreaks, Dark Aether gods, and battles at space. Again, with the tomb, which you would expect, considering it's just down the street from Citadel Day More, again, there's been thousands and thousands of years of zombie outbreaks and battles and warring, as we see depicted on all of the different murals and markings on the walls on the map. The Dark Aether has been bleeding into the universe for eons. And then again, we come over to Shattered Veil. Once again, for hundreds of years, there's been history with the zombies coming into the universe. So basically, at all of these different points in history, zombies have been around always, and basically now it feels like, what was even the point of resetting the universe if zombies were essentially always around in this new universe? Because it worked with Die Maschine. The new universe was created until World War II, and then things got messed up again with the Nazi zombies experiments. It paralleled the original storyline so much because essentially similar happened there. But now we know, well, that's not actually the case. Die Maschine was basically just one example of a million, because apparently there's loads of other dark ether weak spots across the globe, and they've been flooding into our universe for eons, and different cultures and different societies have been battling and holding back the hordes of the dark ether for eons. And in fact, they've even been fighting amongst each other over power over the dark ether. Many different dark ether gods have been communicating with different facets of societies and different cultures, trying to manipulate them to do their bidding, such as Cortifex, for example. And now it feels like, well, what was even the point of rebooting the universe? Because it's all gotten so messy once again. If I want to do an entire storyline video for Black Ops 6, I'm now going to have to explain hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years of lore for every single map. And the thing is, the lore isn't even properly explained for every single map. We have thousands of years of history with only things implied that we can't really properly connect and spell out. Well, maybe, just maybe, it's because it's similar to what happened in the original storyline. Maybe the storyline was essentially linear, just like it was before. Maybe the very first piercing of the Dark Ether Veil was in fact at Die Maschine. Maybe the zombies were not infecting through all of these years, and in fact, it's only when JOSIAH Shem shattered space-time with that device that caused everything to mess up once again, and now it's as if zombies have always been here in this new universe. Now that kind of doesn't make sense, because obviously Die Maschine was only pierced in World War II. JOSIAH Shem shattered space-time a long time ago, hundreds of years ago. So it doesn't really work as well as it did in the original storyline, but the parallels are definitely there. We have an ancient mystic communicating with gods from the other realm, in this case Cortifex, and then we had John D communicating with these angels again from the universe. So the parallels are definitely there, it's just not being executed nearly as well, and I still can't really see how I can make this all make sense. But personally, I think that's how it should be. It should be similar to the original storyline, where Die Maschine is the first outbreak. The problem is it just cannot fit into the storyline because the JOSIAH Shem stuff happened first. Because in the original storyline, whilst Richtofen and Schuster teleporting the Walnut happened around the era of World War II, that is where space-time shattered, which shattered the past retroactively, whereas this time around, space-time shattered in the past. That technically could have shattered the future as well, it just doesn't make as much sense. The only way this can make sense is if JOSIAH Shem shattered space-time in the future, around the time of the cyclotron, or something happened after the cyclotron pierced the veil, and then that caused the past to change. The last thing I want to talk about is regarding Element 115, because to get one of the canisters on Shattered Veil, you need to shoot these big blue liquidy looking crystal things across the map, and these really do resemble Element 115. It's a blue liquidy like substance. In fact, if you compare them side by side, if you put the crystal next to, for example, the blue crystal we have on Shino Numa, if you look at just the blue itself, it's kind of this translucent light blue substance. You can see it's like a liquid substance moving inside, similar to, I guess, the blue 115 camo you can get on your weapons. It looks very, very similar. The shade is very similar. So is this Element 115? Now, previously when we saw Element 115 depicted, it was like these blue things held within rock. So is Element 115 returning? I think it is actually very well possible. It's something I've been talking about for a while. Now, obviously, ever since Blundell took over, Element 115 got changed from being orange or other colors to just being blue. It was always blue from then on. Now, there's a storyline reason for that, which I'm going to explore in a future John D video talking about the early cycles. But for some weird reason in Modern Warfare Zombies, we saw a 115 instrumental song Easter egg, and you had to collect 3 different 115 rocks, and they were all orange, not blue. So I don't know if that was just a mistake by the developers who maybe didn't know better putting that in, didn't really understand the significance lore-wise, especially because at that point it was after Treyarch stepped off of the project and mostly High Moon were doing a lot of the work, I think. Maybe that could be the case, but then the ray gun in Black Ops 6 on its reload cartridge references Element 115, and we know from the terminal in Black Ops 1 that the ray gun is actually powered by cold fusion cell technology merged with Element 115, and probably the blue capsule of the ray gun is actually Element 115. So if the ray gun's been back all this time, this would suggest Element 115 is back. Now obviously it all got thrown into the Dark Ether at the ending of Tag Der Toten, so is this Element 115 being spewed out of the Dark Ether once more? Originally, 115 ended up in all of these universes because the Apothecans literally sent it into these universes like like we see depicted in the Revelations intro cutscene, sending it through the different portals so that they would be able to infect the realm. So are there different Dark Aether gods, maybe the Shadowsmiths even, sending Element 115 out of the Dark Aether to try and infect the world once again in a similar way to what the Apothicons did before? That is very well possible, but surely Element 115 returning has to have something to do with the original characters coming back if they were physically tied to the Elemental Shard, which was Element 115, and they were physically tied to all Element 115 in the universe. In fact, we even have this quote in Blackout of all things from Richtofen saying as such.
Ah, that's the trouble with Element 115. I am it, and it is me.
Then surely this means Element 115 may be on the precipice to return, and that's how the original characters might be returning. Because if we look on JOSIAH Shem's device, that shattered space-time, there is a blue rock in the center, which seems to be in some sort of sphere with circles in it. And to me, it kind of resembles, obviously it's not exactly the same by any means, but it kind of looks similar to the 115 rocks, such as the one we saw on Shinonuma, where basically the silver of this ball inside of the Shem device kind of resembles the rock going around the different blue crystals in the large meteor. So maybe it's somewhat similar to that. Now the thing is, this rock does have the circular symbols all over it, the similar ones from the Origins pillars, like are on the tomb, and we talked about in prior videos how this is some sort of ancient Dark Aether writing that essentially can channel energy. So that was channeling and basically powering the Element 115. But could that be similar to the Shem device? Is this Element 115 at the center, and it has that ball around it with the holes in it that is actually powering it somehow? Now I don't know what the crystals around the device actually are, because this is some sort of disc device and then it has these different colored crystals. I don't know what those crystals are. Are they different versions of Element 115 or even Ethereum? Because we've seen Ethereum and 115 in many different colors: red, blue, green. On Zetsubo no Shima, for example, it's literally in like almost every single color, so much so that we can even create the rainbow water with it. Maybe even the red one is Prima Materia. Maybe these are all different versions of the same thing. Element 115, Ethereum, Prima Materia, they all resemble very similar things. I mean, we've seen red Ethereum crystals that look identical to the red Prima Materia crystals, so it's all getting very blurred what's what nowadays. But yeah, it just has me wondering what this device is. I'm hoping that Shreya can explain it on Janus Towers, because they basically just threw this massive curveball at us. They didn't explain at all what this device actually is. It was just randomly introduced in the Shattered Veil pre-boss cutscene where Richtofen explains it, saying that it's shattered space-time. It's just this random MacGuffin device that literally has the power to completely change the world, introduced out of nowhere with no setup, no build-up, no explanation. That's typical COD Zombies fashion, I guess, but at least with things before like the summoning key, they got a lot of backstory. Hopefully they give us backstory for this, but that should have come before we were introduced to it. It's just introduced at a random left curve. Obviously the reason the developers even created this device was basically for a Deus Ex Machina plot device, so that next map with the Janus Towers melting down, they can probably use this device with the Sentinel artifact or something to completely break the world and probably plunge them into the Dark Aether, leading to COD 2025 and us bringing back the original characters and stuff like that. Now obviously that's why it's been created, but from a lore reason, what is its purpose? I don't know. It just feels extra like a Deus Ex Machina device when it's just introduced with no prior explanation out of nowhere, and suddenly it has the power to change the storyline completely. It's wild. But I do want to harp back on the Janus Towers melting down, because if you look at the Janus Towers themselves, on the cooling towers there are these blue channels that you can see, as well as there's some blue channels on the background wall sort of around the nuclear plant itself. And I'm wondering, is this the same stuff as the blue crystals that we shoot on Shattered Veil? Is this Element 115? Because once again, it is blue, and you can see it's not all just one color of blue. It kind of dims a little bit here and there, implying it's some sort of liquid-like substance inside it, similar to Element 115 or the crystals we see on it. So is that what's powering this, or is it just regular Ethereum, which is mostly seen depicted as purple? I'm not exactly sure, but maybe that has something to do with powering the Sentinel artifact to plunge us into this multiverse era with the liminal spaces, the original characters back, and all hell breaks loose once again. But I've really been rambling here, so I apologize for that. Anyways, let me know all of your thoughts on this in the comments below. What do you think? Do you see the shattering of space-time as potentially as important as I do? Obviously it is. This is the most significant thing that's really happened in the Dark Aether story so far. It's just a shame it just is introduced in such a jarring way all of a sudden with no build-up and no explanation. And it's very interesting as well that JOSIAH Shem shattered space-time accidentally, which Richtofen again in the past story shattered space-time accidentally. He never intended for that, obviously. He was just trying to do time travel, and it messed everything up. And the more and more they tried to fix things, the more time travel they did, the more it broke the universe more and more, and caused the suffering of everything in the entire universe. Could this be the key to making the ending of Modern Warfare Zombies make sense, and setting up some really out there map locales that we've already had leaked to us online? Let me know what you think and just exactly how you think the ending of Black Ops 6 is going to play into the ending of Modern Warfare Zombies, as well as the return of the original characters. Personally, this is why I think is going to happen. They get plunged into the Dark Aether, they meet the original characters in maybe liminal spaces. The Shadowsmiths try and harness the essence of all of them, but ultimately fail. Maybe the original characters' souls in these liminal spaces have to basically fight the Shadowsmiths, keeping the world safe for eternity, giving them a fitting conclusion that they didn't get to get, hopefully in a big budget sense with epic cutscenes that unfortunately the end of Black Ops 4 Zombies didn't get to get. And then Requiem leave the Dark Aether. They've been exposed to the Dark Aether too much. They have to sacrifice their lives for whatever reason. Ava's born for whatever reason. That's all explained maybe at the end of COD 2025. Then they all die. That leads into the Modern Warfare zombie stuff, and everything's tied up nicely. There's still a lot of plot holes in this, obviously. For example, if we go into COD 2025 Zombies, what's going to happen with Janus Richthofen? Is he going to get his family back? And if so, is he still going to be a part of the story, or will he just go in his own liminal space, for example, just live a happy life inside of, for example, the snow globe, living with his family? Maybe that's even a liminal space. Or will he still be active in the storyline? Because if so, there might be two Richthofens, because we know a new one's coming in COD 2025. I would be interested to see two different Richthofens interacting with each other, but surely he is still around by the end, if we're right that the Ava stuff does not tie into the end of the storyline, because we know that he probably has some sort of reason for that stuff occurring. Maybe he even suggests the idea or assists in building the device. We're not exactly sure. And how do you think this is all going to tie into the original characters returning? But anyways, I'm really rambling now. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe if you're not already for latest and greatest Call of Duty news and information. So anyways, thank you for watching, and bye.